Emma Woodhouse, handsome, intelligent, and rich, lived nearly 21 years without the slightest anxiety and suffering. Mrs. Taylor's wedding ceremony is Emma's nanny and teacher. The marriage that she predicted a while ago, therefore she thinks that she can, and it's rumored that she can find a couple for different people. Mrs. Taylor is going to marry Mr. Weston, who lost his wife. Mr. Weston has a son named Frank who is under the guardianship of his uncle, that's why he is called Frank Churchill. But he is waiting for Frank to come to Highbury on his father's wedding day. But there is no sign of Frank. But the one who makes it to the large manor house of Woodhouse in Hartfield without a carriage is Mr. Knightley, the brother-in-law of Emma's sister. It's strange for Mr. Knightley that Frank didn't come to his father's wedding ceremony, but he has a letter from him saying that he couldn't come there because of his aunt's illness. Knightley believes that Frank's aunt has always been sick, and it's even possible that this conversation is a lie. In any case, he must get there himself. Autumn, Mr. Woodhouse, Emma's father, always feels sick and is afraid of catching a cold, so when he feels a little cold from somewhere, he makes his servants responsible to prevent it. Emma talks to her father about a girl named Harriet Smith who has just come to school there. She doesn't have anyone and not even a sign of her family, and this is mysterious to Emma. That's why Emma can't control herself and invites Harriet to their house. She wants to get closer to Harriet to have a new fun for her and know about her story. But she believes that Harriet's nameless family is noble, that's why she wants to teach her the manners of noble people. Harriet talks about the Martin family and Robert Martin, the young son of that family, who helped her a lot last summer, and obviously Robert Martin likes her and Harriet as well, but Emma believes that the Martin family isn't in that position at all. Therefore, she decides to choose another person for Harriet to marry her. This search begins. Emma takes her to Mrs. Taylor's house, who changed her name to Mrs. Weston after marriage. Emma made an appointment with her former nanny that she will visit her every day. There they meet Mr. Elton, the priest of that area. She decides that now she should bring Mr. Elton closer to Harriet so that they can get married. Emma starts to describe Frank Churchill in a way that shows that she is interested, while Elton tries to bring the matter to himself. The next day, Emma and Harriet are checking out different ribbons at the dress shop and Mrs. Bates comes there. She is a talkative woman who tries to distance herself from her every time, not because of her talkativeness, but because of her low social status. Bates talks to her about her sister's daughter, Jane Fairfax, about how Jane gets dizziness near water at a party, and when she was to fall into the water, Mr. Dixon kindly saves her. On the way back, she tells Harriet how much she hates Jane Fairfax. At this moment, Harriet sees Robert Martin, who is in a field on the way back, and goes towards him with enthusiasm. But when he sees this, he separates himself and waits for her. After a short meeting with Robert, Harriet joins Emma, and when she asks her opinion about Robert Martin, she clearly says that she doesn't have the decency of the nobles. This talk is clearly affecting Harriet's opinion. But it's imagined in different ways that Elton fell in love with Harriet. Elton asks Emma to draw a painting of Harriet, and then when Emma's father says that it would be better to make a frame for this painting, Mr. Elton says that he will do it. On the other hand, Mr. Knightley, during his conversation with Mrs. Weston, tells her that the relationship between Emma and Harriet isn't a good one, because Harriet doesn't know anything and puts herself at Emma's disposal, and Emma doesn't make the right decisions for her. Therefore, he decides to go to the Martin family's house and tell Robert to express his interest in Harriet and ask her directly. Robert sends a letter to Harriet and directly expresses his desire. Harriet happily explains this issue to Emma and shows her the letter. But Emma tells Harriet to give a negative answer to Robert Martin's request, like it's Harriet's own decision. This negative answer makes Mr. Knightley have a serious talk with Emma that she is destroying Harriet's life by doing this. Robert Martin was and is suitable for Harriet in every way, but Emma believes that Harriet is the child of a noble and shouldn't marry a farmer. Their conversation leads to Emma saying that men shouldn't choose women based on their appearance, and that's a woman's right to choose what she wants. Knightley tells her that this is what he gave to Harriet and not Harriet's choice, which in the end Emma says that she wants to keep Harriet for herself. Elton takes the expensive and eye-catching frame for the painting that Emma took from Harriet and presents it to Harriet at Emma's request. John Knightley comes to his father's house with his wife Isabel, Emma's sister. This meeting causes George Knightley to ask Emma to put aside their enmity and be friends with each other. But both of them still have their opinion. Mr. Weston is having a party for Christmas, but Harriet cannot attend because of illness. At the party, Mr. Elton tries his best to attract Emma's attention. On the other hand, Frank won't come to the party again, which makes Emma sad. George Knightley offers a different opinion about Frank Churchill, which causes Emma to argue again with Knightley, and in the end, she defines her position about Frank Churchill, who is fanatical about him. At dinner, Mr. Weston says that Frank's aunt said she would disinherit him if he didn't marry a rich woman. The talk about Frank continues until Elton says that there is going to be a snow night. This talk makes Mr. Woodhouse and the rest of the guests leave the table as soon as possible and ride the carriage to their homes. This is the time that Emma's and Elton's stroller become one by chance or on purpose. Inside the carriage, Elton tells his heart to Emma, and even though Emma thought that Elton had fallen in love with Harriet, he says that he had always loved her all this time and did everything for Harriet because Emma was with her and to attract her attention. Emma gives Elton a negative response to this proposal, and this causes Elton to get off the carriage and continue his journey alone and on foot. But after that, he goes to see Harriet and tells her about what happened. Harriet is upset about this, but Emma tries to make her understand that it was her vain efforts that made such a thing for her. But Harriet says she's right, she doesn't deserve someone in Elton's position. Harriet wants to burn the frame of the painting, but she stops her because the painting she drew of Harriet is valuable and tells her that she will keep it for her. Isabel and her family leave the Woodhouse house. Spring, Mr. Elton is gone for a while, and from the other side Mrs. Bates tells Emma and Harriet that Jane has come there for 3 months. Jane is Emma's age and has always been considered a rival for her, that's why she never liked her, and now she has to endure her for 3 months and see her at various parties. But Emma invites her and Mrs. Bates to Hartfield out of etiquette. At dinner, Mrs. Bates mentions that Jane met Frank Churchill last October, just as her father was getting married. Emma asks Jane about Frank, but Jane somehow avoids answering. After dinner, Emma plays the piano for the guests, and Jane wants to play after that, but she tells her that it's a pity that she didn't bring her sheet music. But Jane plays the piano very skillfully without having a sheet music book. This issue makes Emma angry. George also uses this opportunity and adds to Emma's anger with his words and compliments about Jane. On a rainy day, when Emma and Harriet have gone to the fabric store, the Martin family comes there with Robert Martin, which makes Harriet feel uncomfortable and leave. But in the relationship that Robert and Harriet have with each other, there are still signs of love. Martin's family wants Harriet to visit them again. But before Harriet goes to their house, she warns her not to behave like to return to the past memories. At the same moment, she meets Frank Churchill, without knowing that he is Frank Churchill. After that, Mr. Weston and Frank come to see Emma and ask Emma to accompany Frank on a tour of the village, and Emma accepts the request without delay. Red asks about Frank's meeting with Jane, but Frank refuses to answer and moves the discussion to shopping at a fabric store. After that, a party is held by the businessman Cole. Inside the party, news spreads that someone has sent an expensive piano to Jane, which she thinks is a gift from Mr. Dixon, the same person who saved her near the water at that party. On the other hand, Knightley is very boastful about the fact that Frank went all the way to London and back just to cut his hair. At the party, Knightley and Jane perform a piano and violin duet. In the ceremony held in the church after Elton's return, the villagers get to know Augusta, Elton's wife. She is a boastful and uncultured woman who constantly insults others. Frank, who was gone for a while, is going to return there again, and Mr. Weston informs Emma and Harriet that they want to have a dance party. Emma was waiting for this assembly, because Frank had asked her to accompany him as the first dance. That's why she trains with Harriet for this job. But during the party, Mrs. Taylor tells Emma that Augusta Elton expects to start the dance party with her as the bride, and that means Frank has to dance with her. But Mr. Weston promises her that he will give the dance request to Augusta so she can dance with Frank. The dance begins. But Harriet doesn't have anyone to dance with. Mrs. Taylor asks Elton to dance with her, but he clearly rejects this request, which is considered as an insult. At this time, Knightley sees that Harriet is upset, so he asks her to dance. Harriet happily accepts and the dance continues. After that, Emma thanks Knightley for what he did for Harriet, and after dinner, this time, Emma and Knightley dance with each other, and during the dance, a feeling develops between them. After the ceremony, Emma goes home, and George Knightley walks with his foot. He brings her there, and when Emma sees him from behind the window and comes to meet him. At this moment, Churchill arrives there with Harriet, who isn't feeling well and is in his arms. Harriet tells Emma that she feels like she's in love. But she thinks that this feeling was formed towards Frank Churchill. She assures Harriet that she will not interfere in her choice this time and the difference in position is no longer important. Seeing Emma's behavior, Knightley becomes a little distant towards her and even accepts when Augusta asks her for a tour of her castle, even though it's clearly not something that Emma would want. Augusta asks Knightley to give the invitations, but Knightley tells her, the only person who can do this is his future wife and until then he will do it himself. In the summer, everyone goes to George Knightley's mansion and castle. Sneak glances are exchanged between Emma and Knightley, but obviously not as much as before, and Knightley tries to show his displeasure with Emma. Jane leaves because of emotional distress and after that Frank brings himself there. Frank tells Emma about his departure from England. Emma asks him to attend an outdoor party and Frank accepts her request. The party is boring. Frank tries to warm up the environment by creating a game from Emma's side. This game continues in the form of boredom until Emma insults Mrs. Bates because of her talkativeness and puts this characteristic on her. But this behavior causes discomfort and silence for everyone. Before leaving, Knightley talks to Emma and tells her that because of her pride, she makes others uncomfortable. These words make Emma cry and she leaves. After that, with her father's words, she decides to go see Mrs. Bates and apologize to her. She is upset with her behavior, but Mrs. Bates treats him with good manners as usual and says that she isn't upset with her. After that, George Knightley says goodbye to the Woodhouse family because he wants to go to his castle. On the other hand, news reaches to Emma through Mrs. Taylor that Frank and Jane got engaged a long time ago and this engagement was secret, that's why no one knew about it. Emma is upset and shocked by this, but she goes to visit Harriet and tells her about Frank, but Harriet tells Emma why she should comfort her. Harriet is in love with George Knightley. After he asked her to dance with him in the dance hall and didn't let her be upset. This time as well, she was wrong. She thought that Harriet fell in love with Frank because of her rescue, but the story is different. Harriet says that she thinks George Knightley is also interested in her, because he paid attention to her at different times. He has shown that he has always been attentive to her and treated her with kindness and gentleness. Emma speaks in a way that Harriet understands. She is interested in Knightley. This issue that in the past made her reject the request of Robert Martin, and now she likes George Knightley, she is on this path again. George Knightley looks for Emma and when he finds her, he expresses his love for her and asks her to marry him. But Emma tells her about Harriet's talk and Knightley tells her that she should tell Robert Martin to propose to Harriet again, but Emma says she will do it herself. In the end, Emma goes to see Robert Martin and confesses to him what a mistake she made against her and Harriet. Robert Martin proposed to Harriet again and this time Harriet accepts his request. Harriet goes to see Emma and tells her about this. She also tells her that her father has revealed himself to her. He is a businessman. Harriet and Emma's relationship become good again. And finally, Emma and George Knightley marry each other.